Officer Bobby Wallace saw a black Tesla and made a decision, not based on a traffic violation, not based on probable cause, based on one thing only. A black man was behind the wheel of a car Wallace had already decided he couldn't own. He hit his lights and pulled him over. The driver was Jerome Martinez. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. But he watched the cruiser lights flood his rearview mirror, pulled over calmly, and placed both hands flat on the steering wheel. He had been expecting this. He reached over and pressed record on his phone. Wallace walked up to the window and skipped the pleasantries entirely. "Whose car is this? There's no way this is yours. Tell me how you got it." Jerome handed over his license and registration without a word. Wallace glanced at them and pushed them back. "That doesn't prove anything. Either you let me search this vehicle, or you're leaving here in cuffs." Jerome told him he had no legal right to search the car. Wallace told him he didn't care. Jerome asked what he was being arrested for. Wallace said, "I'm the one asking questions here. Step out or get cuffed. Your choice." What Bobby Wallace did not know, what he was about to find out in the most career-ending way possible, was that the man sitting calmly in the Tesla was Jerome Martinez, the newly appointed chief of police of Parkdale. That this entire stop had been a deliberate test, that the dash cam had been recording since the moment Wallace's cruiser first appeared in that mirror, and that inside the glove compartment right next to Jerome's chief of police badge was a sealed envelope with Bobby Wallace's name printed across the front. Before we go any further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're all tuning in from. And if you believe driving an expensive car while black is not a crime and should never be treated as suspicious, hit like and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. The ceremony was short. That was Jerome's first clue that this job was going to be harder than the title suggested. There were cameras, of course, a podium, a flag. The mayor of Parkdale stood beside Jerome and smiled the wide, practiced smile of a man who needed this moment to look good on the evening news. Jerome raised his right hand, repeated the oath, and felt the weight of the badge as it was pinned to his chest. Not with pride, exactly, but with the particular gravity of a man who understood what it actually meant to carry one. The room applauded. Jerome nodded. He shook hands with city council members whose names he had already memorized, smiled at a room full of officers who were still deciding whether to trust him, and said the right things into the right microphones. Then the cameras left. The mayor appeared at his elbow almost immediately, the smile dialed down, voice lower. They walked to the edge of the room together, away from the remaining officers and the catering staff folding up tables. "I'm going to be straight with you," the mayor said. "The DOJ has been watching this department for 14 months. We have 2 active federal complaints, a civil lawsuit in discovery, and a city council that is 6 weeks away from demanding a full independent investigation. I didn't hire you to be a symbol, Jerome. I hired you because you know how to fix broken departments before someone else fixes them for you." He paused. "So fix it, before they do it for us." Jerome looked at him evenly. "I understand. Do you have a plan?" "Yes." The mayor waited for more. Jerome didn't offer any. They shook hands, and Jerome walked to his new office, a corner room on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking lot and a desk that still had his predecessor's name taped to the front. He sat down, loosened his tie, and opened the file he had been building for 3 weeks before he ever took the oath. 47 complaints in 18 months, 31 of them involving black or Latino drivers. 22 of those stops had produced no citation, no arrest, and no documented probable cause. The pattern wasn't subtle. It wasn't even hidden. It was just never acted on, because the people who had the power to act on it had, for years, found it easier not to. Jerome closed the file. He already knew what needed to be done. He had known since before they offered him the job. What he needed now wasn't more paperwork or another internal review board. What he needed was evidence that was impossible to argue with, the kind that didn't come from a spreadsheet, but from a dash cam on a public road in broad daylight. He pulled out his phone and checked the weather forecast for the next 3 days. Clear skies, good visibility, perfect. Jerome's personal Tesla had been sitting in his garage for 11 days, since before the move, before the ceremony, before any of it. He had driven it from his previous city himself, alone, with 2 boxes of books in the back seat and the quiet certainty that he was walking into the hardest assignment of his career. On the morning of day 1, he didn't go to the office. He went to the garage. He pulled off the temporary paper plates he had been using since registration and replaced them with his permanent civilian plates. No department markings, no rank insignia. Nothing on the car that identified it as anything other than what it looked like. A matte black Tesla owned by a black man who had worked hard enough to afford one. That was the point. That was the whole point. His deputy, Captain Sandra Reyes, called him at 7:42 a.m. "The department vehicle is ready when you are," she said, "and your first briefing is at 9. Cancel the briefing. Push everything to tomorrow morning." Silence. Then, "Jerome, what are you doing?" "Constitutional field calibration." Another silence, longer this time. "That is not a real thing." "It is now. You've been chief for 18 hours. 17. I'll be back by 6. He heard her exhale, the specific exhale of someone who had raised valid objections and knew they weren't going to be heard. "You're going to get yourself pulled over," she said. "That's the idea, Sandra." He hung up before she could respond, dropped his phone into the center console, and backed out of the garage. The route he had mapped the night before covered 4 corridors, the 4 highest complaint patrol zones in Parkdale. He cross-referenced against shift schedules so he knew which officers were on the road at which hours. He wasn't going out there blindly. He was going out there methodically. There was a difference, and that difference mattered to him. He drove day 1 in complete silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the road, the Tesla's near-silent engine, and his own eyes tracking everything. Which cruisers ran his plates? Which ones followed him for a block before peeling off? Which ones clocked the car and moved on without a second look? He made mental notes. He observed. He said nothing to anyone. He was stopped once, briefly, by a veteran officer named Carver who ran his plates, found them clean, apologized for the inconvenience, and went on his way. Professional. Textbook. The kind of stop that was supposed to be routine but had become so rare in these corridors that it almost felt remarkable. Jerome drove home at dusk. He sat in the parked Tesla in his driveway for a while and stared at the garage door. Day 1 told him the problem was real but uneven. Some officers were doing it right. Day 2 would tell him more. Day 3 would tell him everything. Officer Bobby Wallace had been on the force for exactly 93 days, and in that time he had developed a very clear idea of what good police work looked like. It looked like him. He was not a bad person, in the way that people who have never been seriously challenged rarely are. He was 26 years old, stocky, confident, and possessed of the kind of absolute certainty that tends to grow in young men who move through the world without ever being told they are wrong. He had gone to the academy because his uncle was on the force and because, in his own words, he liked the idea of being the one in charge. He graduated in the middle third of his class, shook a lot of hands, and showed up to Parkdale PD on his first day with the energy of someone arriving to collect something that was already owed to him. His training officer, a 15-year veteran named Dorset, had seen the type before. Dorset had submitted a quiet, careful reassignment request at the end of Wallace's 6th week, the kind of request that was worded professionally but meant something very specific. This one isn't ready, and I'm not sure he ever will be. The request was reviewed, filed, and denied by a shift supervisor who liked Wallace's clearance numbers and didn't ask many questions about how they were generated. 2 complaints had already been filed against Wallace by the time Jerome Martinez was being sworn in across town. The first came from a 34-year-old black schoolteacher who said Wallace had pulled her over twice in the same week, demanded to know where she was going both times, and issued no citation on either occasion. The second came from a Latino delivery driver who said Wallace had followed him for 12 blocks before pulling him over, accused him of driving a vehicle that didn't match his profile, and refused to explain what that meant when asked. Wallace's response to both complaints was identical: oversensitive. Both of them. People who didn't understand what real police work required. He had told his buddy at the station, "Some people just can't handle being stopped. They make it a whole thing." His buddy had nodded. Nobody had pushed back. So on the morning of day 3, the morning a matte black Tesla eased into his patrol corridor at 1423, Bobby Wallace was exactly the officer he had always been. Uncorrected, unquestioned, utterly certain that his instincts were the same thing as the law. He saw the Tesla. He saw the driver. He didn't think about probable cause. He didn't think about the 2 complaints sitting in a file with his name on them. He didn't think about the new chief everyone at the station had been quietly talking about all week. The federal guy, the reformer, the one who was supposedly going to shake everything up. He just thought, that car, that driver, something's off. And he reached for his light bar. Jerome saw the cruiser the moment it turned onto the road behind him. He didn't react. He didn't slow down or speed up. He just noted it the way a man who has spent his life in law enforcement notes things, calmly. This precisely with the kind of awareness that doesn't come from training so much as from years of simply existing in a black body on American roads. He checked his speed, 34 in a 35. He checked his mirrors. He rolled his shoulders once, very slightly, and kept driving. Behind him, Wallace ran the plates. The system came back clean in less than 15 seconds. Registered owner. No warrants, no flags, no violations. Clean as a plate could be. Any reason that might have existed to keep following the Tesla evaporated the moment that result came back. Wallace kept following anyway. 4 blocks, then 5, then 6. The cruiser stayed close, not right on top of him, but close enough that Jerome could read the intention clearly. He reached over without breaking his gaze from the road and pressed record on his phone, propping it against the base of the center console so the lens faced the driver's side window. And then he put his hand back on the wheel. On block 7, the lights came on. Red and blue filled the Tesla's interior, bouncing off the rearview mirror, off the dash, off Jerome's steady, expressionless face. He signaled immediately. He pulled to the shoulder smoothly and completely, no hesitation, no drama. He put the car in park, cut the engine, and placed both hands flat on the steering wheel, high, visible, palms forward, before Wallace's cruiser had even come to a full stop behind him. He had been pulled over before, not like this. Not as a chief, not as a federal investigator, not as anything professional, just as a man. Just as a black man in a car that someone decided didn't belong to him. He knew this choreography in his body the way people know the choreography of things that have happened to them enough times to become instinct. Hands up, stay still, speak slowly, don't make it worse. The difference this time was the badge in his glove compartment, and the sealed envelope next to it, and the dash cam footage that was already uploading in real time to a secure server he had configured the night before. He watched Wallace climb out of the cruiser in his side mirror. Young. deliberate. That specific walk. The walk of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go before it started. Jerome exhaled once. He kept his hands exactly where they were. He had built this moment carefully and patiently over 3 days. He had known it was coming. He had planned for it, mapped it, engineered the conditions for it with the precision of a man who had spent 18 years building cases. None of that made it easy to sit there with his hands raised in his own car on a public road where he had broken no law. He sat there anyway. Wallace didn't start with a greeting. He came up to the driver's side window, rested one hand on the roof of the Tesla, and looked down at Jerome the way someone looks at something they've already categorized. His very first words were not license and registration. They were not, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" They were not any of the procedural, legally grounded phrases they teach at the academy for exactly this kind of stop. His first words were, "Whose car is this?" Jerome looked at him evenly. "Mine, officer." "Uh-huh." Wallace's eyes moved around the interior of the Tesla, the clean dash, the screen, the quality of everything. "And how exactly did you come to own a car like this?" "I bought it," Jerome said, "like most people buy cars." He reached into the center console and produced his license and registration without being asked, holding them out through the window. Wallace took them, looked at them for about 4 seconds, not long enough to actually read them, and handed them back. "Those don't tell me much," Wallace said. Jerome kept his voice level. "Officer, those are the documents the law requires me to carry and present. I've presented them. Can you tell me why I was stopped?" Wallace ignored the question entirely. What happened next was brief and ugly and caught on 2 cameras simultaneously, Jerome's phone against the center console and the department dash cam mounted in Wallace's own cruiser, the footage of which would later become a key exhibit in 3 separate proceedings. Wallace used a racial slur. He said it with the casual ease of someone who had said it before, without consequence, which told Jerome everything he needed to know about what kind of officer Bobby Wallace had been allowed to become. Jerome's jaw tightened. It was the only visible crack in his composure, a single, almost imperceptible clench of the muscle along his jawline. And then it was gone, smoothed back into stillness. He spoke with complete calm. "Officer, you do not have probable cause to detain me. I am invoking my Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. I am not consenting to any search of this vehicle. If I am being detained, I am asking you to state the legal basis for that detention clearly." He had delivered those words in federal courtrooms. He had trained junior investigators to deliver them in the field. He had read that amendment aloud so many times that it lived somewhere in him below thought, below reaction, in the part of the brain where language and survival overlap. Wallace stared at him. Then Wallace said, "Either you let me search this vehicle, or you're leaving here in handcuffs." Jerome looked at him steadily. "Arrested for what?" Wallace leaned down, his face closer to the window now. "I'm the one asking questions. Step out, or get cuffed. Your choice." Jerome did not move. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Bobby Wallace the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved, with patience, with clarity, and with the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what is inside the glove compartment and exactly what it means. "Okay," Jerome said softly, "have it your way. If you've made it this far, you already know where this is going, and trust me, the ending hits harder than you think. Hit like right now so more people see this story, and if you're new here, subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. Now let's get back to it." Wallace said the word obstruction like it was a magic spell. Like the mere sound of it was enough to make the Constitution fold. He grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. No warrant, no consent, no legal basis of any kind, and stepped back with the expectation that Jerome would either resist or crumble. Jerome did neither. He simply unclipped his seatbelt, stepped out of the Tesla with his hands still visible, and moved to the side of the road without a word. He stood on the gravel shoulder with his arms loose at his sides and watched. His phone was still recording against the center console. Wallace's own dash cam was recording from the cruiser behind them. Between the two angles, every single second of what followed was being captured in high definition and uploaded in real time to a private, secure server Jerome had configured from his home office the night before day one. He had anticipated exactly this. He had built the infrastructure for exactly this. The only variable he hadn't been able to predict was which officer would be the one to walk into it. And now he knew. Wallace moved through the Tesla with the confidence of someone who expected to find something because he had already decided something was there. He checked the center console first. Charging cables, a notepad, a protein bar, nothing. He checked under the front seats. Nothing. Yet he opened the back door and checked the rear. Nothing. His movements got slightly faster as each empty space failed to justify the stop that preceded it, the slur that followed it, or the illegal search that was now being added to a file with his name on it. Then he reached for the glove compartment. He pulled the latch. The door dropped open. And the late afternoon light fell directly onto the one thing Bobby Wallace was not prepared to see in the glove compartment of a car he had assumed belonged to someone with no power, no recourse, and no way to fight back. A gold badge, heavy, official, unmistakable. Wallace picked it up slowly, the way you pick something up when part of your brain already knows you shouldn't be holding it. He turned it over. The seal of the Parkdale Police Department caught the light. He looked at the credential wallet beside it and flipped it open with his thumb. Jerome D. Martinez, Chief of Police, Parkdale PD. The photograph was clear. The man in the photograph was standing 5 feet behind him on the gravel shoulder with his arms at his sides. Wallace did not move. He didn't speak. The hand holding the badge stayed exactly where it was. Suspended, like his body had sent an urgent message to his brain, and his brain had not yet decided what to do with it. And then he saw the envelope. It was sealed, Manila, standard department issue. His full legal name was printed across the front in clean block letters, Officer Robert T. Wallace, and in the upper left corner, the return designation read, Office of the Chief of Police, Parkdale PD. Jerome's voice came from behind him. Quiet, steady. No legal caution in it this time, no recitation of rights, no careful procedural framing. Just words, simple and direct and final. Go ahead and open it. I signed it myself. 2 days ago. Wallace turned around slowly. He looked at Jerome, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since the stop began, and something moved behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet. More like the specific vertigo of a man watching the ground give way beneath him and finally understanding that there is nothing underneath. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single document. At the top, in bold, Notice of Investigation, Racial Profiling and Pattern of Unconstitutional Stops. His name, his badge number. 2 prior complaints, summarized, a recommendation for immediate review, and at the bottom, a signature line bearing the name and title of the Parkdale Chief of Police, with a date 2 days prior, and Jerome Martinez's signature written across it in clean, deliberate ink. Wallace stood on the shoulder of that road, holding his own investigation notice while the man who had signed it waited calmly behind him. He had no words. There were no words available for what had just happened to him. Jerome had a few. "Put the badge down on the seat," he said quietly, "and step away from the vehicle." Jerome didn't celebrate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say anything beyond what was necessary, because this was never about humiliation. It was about documentation. And the documentation was already done. He reached into the Tesla, retrieved his badge and credentials, and clipped the badge to his belt. Then he pulled out his personal phone and called the department's dispatch line directly, bypassing the radio Wallace could hear. "This is Chief Jerome Martinez, badge number 1001. I need a shift supervisor and an internal affairs officer to my location immediately." He gave the road name and cross street. "This is not a request." He hung up and stood beside his Tesla with his hands in his jacket pockets and waited. Wallace sat down on the curb. Nobody told him to. He just sat, the envelope still in one hand, his face doing the slow, quiet work of rearranging itself around a reality it hadn't been prepared for. Jerome looked at him once, not with anger, not with satisfaction, and then looked away, back down the road, then giving the young officer the small mercy of not being watched while he fell apart. The supervisor arrived in 11 minutes. Internal Affairs was 4 minutes behind her. Jerome met them at their vehicles, showed his credentials, and walked them through the sequence of events with the calm efficiency of someone delivering a briefing, which is exactly what it was. He pointed to the dash cam footage already queued on his phone, explained the secure server, and handed over the chain of custody for Wallace's violation log before anyone asked for it. Wallace surrendered his badge without being told twice. His weapon was secured by the supervisor. He sat on that curb for 22 minutes before anyone put him in a vehicle, and in those 22 minutes, Jerome Martinez did not look at him again. The full dash cam footage ran 23 minutes and 14 seconds. By the time Jerome pulled back into his driveway that evening, it had already finished uploading. The footage broke nationally in 48 hours. It didn't break because Jerome released it. He hadn't, not yet. Not officially. It broke because someone at the department leaked a clip to a local journalist who uploaded 12 seconds of it to social media at 11 p.m., and by 6 a.m. the following morning, those 12 seconds had been viewed 9 million times. By noon, the full 23 minutes were everywhere. The comment section of the World had a lot of opinions. Cable news had more. Jerome read none of it. He had a press conference to prepare for. He stood at the podium 4 days after the stop with the Parkdale city seal behind him and the dash cam footage paused on a screen to his left, frozen on the moment Wallace opened the credential wallet and saw the photograph. Jerome did not gloat. He did not perform. He spoke for 11 minutes in plain, direct language about what the footage showed, in what it represented, and what Parkdale was going to do about it. He announced the Parkdale Constitutional Policing Initiative, mandatory bias recognition training, new accountability structures for complaint investigations, an independent civilian review board with actual subpoena power, and a department-wide audit of every stop logged without a resulting citation over the previous 3 years. He said the audit would be conducted publicly and the results published. A journalist asked if he felt the stop had been personal. Jerome paused. "Every black man who has ever been pulled over for no reason felt it personally," he said. "I'm just the one who happened to have a badge in the glove compartment when it happened to me." Wallace's termination was appealed through the union and heard in arbitration 7 months later. The arbitrator reviewed the dash cam footage, the 2 prior complaints, the training officer's reassignment request that had been denied, and the internal affairs report. The termination was upheld in full on every count. 4 years later, racial disparity in Parkdale traffic stops was down 74%. The Civilian Review Board had reviewed over 200 complaints and referred 11 officers for disciplinary action. 6 of those officers were no longer on the force. And on the first day of every new officer orientation at Parkdale PD, before anything else, before the handbook, before the equipment issue, before the introduction to department leadership, A screen comes down at the front of the room. The lights go down. 23 minutes and 14 seconds of dash cam footage begins to play. Nobody tells the new recruits what they're about to watch. Nobody explains it beforehand. They just watch a black Tesla moving at 34 miles per hour down an empty road and a patrol cruiser with no legal reason to follow it, following it anyway. They watch the stop. They watch the slur. They watch the glove compartment open, and then they watch the man on the gravel shoulder clip his badge to his belt, pull out his phone, and make a call. Every single one of them knows, by the time the screen goes dark, exactly what kind of officer they are being asked never to become. Every single one of them knows, by the time the screen goes dark, exactly what kind of officer they are being asked never to become. And now, so do you. If this story said something to you, like this video. It takes 1 second, and it helps more people find it. Subscribe if you want to see more stories that don't get told loudly enough. And drop in the comments. Do you think Bobby Wallace deserved what happened to him, or did the system fail him too? I want to read what you think. See you in the next one.